implying there might be such a thing as progress instead of just random chance. But what Korzybski meant was that due to language, I can receive signals from Confucius. As a matter of fact, I got an edition of Confucius with the Chinese on one page and the English translation on the facing page, and I can read some of the ideograms. I can receive signals from Heraclitus, Plato, etc., etc., and I can receive signals from the latest scientific publications that are online. And so as time passes, more and more information becomes more and more available to more and more people, which means more and more changes in technology, which means more and more changes in society. So I read Korzybski around 1950, I guess, and the last 50 years have not surprised me at all. I've been expecting rapid changes. In the last year, all of a sudden breakthroughs, I've been expecting them all along. I've been expecting we're going to go into space long before anybody else was expecting it. Now the acceleration of information has reached the point where I think it's totally out of control and nobody can stop it. The only way they can stop it is by forming a world government of a totalitarian nature. And the people who most want to control communication are the people who are most afraid of world governments, so they'll never get together to form a world government, so they'll always be. Freedom is increasing all the time because on internet you can publish anything, and if they stop you in one place, you just route it through the Netherlands and it comes right back onto the web in the United States again. And Nietzsche has always been a major influence, not Zarathustra. The whole Superman thing I don't care much for. What I like is Nietzsche's later works where he tears philosophy to shreds and destroys all of our ordinary concepts of common sense and the self, the ego, the concrete real world. And
so Beyond Good and Evil and those books?
And Twilight of the Idols and the Antichrist and The Will to Power. And Karl R. Popper was a major influence for a long time. Well, I've read a lot of philosophers who are trying to make sense out of modern science philosophically, and next to Korzybski, I would say Popper has had the biggest influence on me. And then there's Benjamin Tucker, who was absolutely the best writer in the individualist anarchist tradition. And even though individualist anarchism sounds rather extreme, most of Tucker's ideas are, well, not most, but let's say about 3/4 of his ideas are pretty much accepted by the Libertarian Party now, and more and more Americans are beginning to sense the world the way Tucker sensed it.
When was he writing?
Well, he did most of his writing between the 1880s and 1914. He appeared for a while in a magazine called The New Free Woman, edited by Harriet Shaw Weaver, who also was publishing James Joyce and Ezra Pound in every issue. And Joyce apparently read Tucker because he told somebody in Paris that Tucker had the clearest head ever in politics. And he seems to have influenced Pound too, because Pound uses the word usury exactly the way Tucker used it, to describe the manipulation of currency in order to make a profit on the exchange rate.
Isn't that the definition?
No, the definition is an excessive charge, an excessive interest charge. That's the current definition. The Aristotelian definition was any interest charge.
That's what I thought it was, just interest of any kind.
Well, no, in the modern world, because interest is so widespread, they've had to change. It's excessive interest is now called usury. Anyway, Benjamin Tucker, Karl Popper, Alfred Korzybski, Friedrich Nietzsche, and who else? Oh, Timothy Leary. How the hell could I leave him out? Timothy Leary, Harry Stack Sullivan, Eric Byrne. Sullivan and Byrne. Sullivan seems like a great predecessor of Leary, and Byrne seems like a great popularizer of Leary without the psychedelics. Leave out the psychedelics, and Byrne is just repeating Leary. What Leary, in his first book called Transactions, Byrne called games. About the same time Leary started calling them games. Wilhelm Reich, which just goes to show the effects of censorship. I was reading a lot of psychology, I always have, but I probably never would have gotten turned on to Reich if the government hadn't burned his books. That got me curious. Who is this man that so terrorized the American government that they were afraid to leave his books in circulation and collected them all and burned them in an incinerator in New York? I went around every place in New York, everybody I knew in New York, trying to find somebody who owned one or two of his books. I found somebody. He wouldn't lend them to me. They were too valuable at that point. But I could go to his apartment in the afternoon and read them. And I thought Reich made a great deal of sense on the psychological and neurological level. I wasn't so sure about the orgone. Now I found a bibliography of 400 scientific papers confirming Reich's basic orgone experiments. So I'm beginning to reconsider the orgone theory too.
You can buy a lot of orgone-based products online too. Interesting.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, this bibliography, it's by James DeMayo, and it has 400 papers by over 100 scientists confirming Reich's basic experiments. And there's been 2 PhDs granted in Germany for experiments duplicating Reich's orgone accumulator experiments. And yet the so-called skeptics, as I call them, the people who call themselves skeptics but never doubt their own dogmas, the gang that put out the Skeptical Inquirer, every time they mention Reich, they say his work has never been confirmed. Which just goes to show they're so damn dogmatic they don't bother to study a subject before they pontificate on it, or they're fucking liars. I don't know which. I tend to suspect they're so goddamn dogmatic they don't bother examining the evidence and they don't know that there are this many papers confirming Reich. Although they should know, James DeMayo, the guy who did the bibliography, sent them a copy of it. He got a polite note back about why they didn't have room to print that.
I'll bet.
Aleister Crowley has been a major influence.
Well, that's unusual. How has he influenced you?
Well, it started out with Alan Watts. I was having dinner with Alan Watts, and I mentioned the Illuminatus book that Shay and I were writing, and the idea that the eye on the pyramid on the dollar bill is a secret symbol of the Illuminati, which I thought was one of the crazier conspiracy theories. And Alan Watts said, that reminds me, the best book I've read all year is called The Eye in the Triangle. It's a biography of Aleister Crowley. Well, I thought Alan was a pretty bright guy, and if he recommended a book, so I went and read this biography of Crowley, and that got me hooked. I started reading everything I could find by Crowley. Then I started doing his magical exercises, and I started getting results. And I don't think of it in terms of anything supernatural. Neither did Crowley. And as I say, The Psychology of Hashish, he says, thank God I'm an atheist. I think he may have been the first one to have said that. Crowley's magic is a technique for changing your level of consciousness in various interesting ways, and you can quite easily go totally nuts with his technique if you're not careful. If you are careful, you might survive. Whether I've gone nuts or one of the survivors is a matter about which I cannot speak objectively.
How would you say he influenced you, though?
Well, he combined techniques. He was a kind of eclectic. He started out with the European Rosicrucian tradition. Then he got into the sex magic side of European Rosicrucianism. Then he studied Buddhism in Ceylon with a real Buddhist teacher. Then he went to India and studied yoga there. Then he studied Sufism in North Africa. And then he built up this system which combines several different mystical traditions with a very scientific procedure. You do the exercise, the ritual, the yoga position, whatever, and you make notes on what happens afterwards, and you keep what he called a magical diary. And you see what you're doing to yourself and which direction you're developing in, and if you're developing in a goofy direction, you start doing a different type of exercise. If you know what you're doing, if you have enough common sense to know you're going goofy. Of course, at one stage of doing a lot of Crowley work, I was convinced I was receiving communication